Table for One, Episode 9. This week we're looking at Tiny Epic Everything. Hey everybody, welcome back to Table for One. This is Episode 9. This is Anthony, I'm here with Jason again.
Hey!
And this week we're going to be talking about the Tiny Epic line of games from Scott Almes. So that is all the stuff currently out. Tiny Epic Kingdoms, Tiny Epic Defenders, Tiny Epic Galaxies, Tiny Epic Western, and then whatever one's on Kickstarter right now, because there's always one on Kickstarter, right?
Tiny Epic Quest.
Yes, which actually looks pretty cool. Having seen it both at the cons and now the Kickstarter, it's pretty cool. That's what we're going to be talking about this week. Real quick, apologies for missing last week. You know, life got in the way and just couldn't quite get this pulled together. But we are back. This is a weekly podcast, so we'll be here this week. You will hear from us next week as well. But this week we're going to be talking about those Tiny Epic games. Jason is probably more the expert here than myself. This is, for some reason, just not a series I've ever dove into as much as I could have. This is one that Daniel loves, too, like over on BGA. And it just, with the exception of a couple, I just haven't really got into it as much. But they are great when I've played them, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, and they all have solo mode, so they all belong right here.
Absolutely. So I'm going to throw it over to Jason here now, because he's going to kind of give us the rundown. We'll talk about the games, and then maybe dive into a little bit of, you know, what makes these games interesting and kind of how the Tiny Epic model works.
Right, so I'm going to give a bunch of Tiny Epic explanations over here. I hope you guys can kind of pick out what's going on, and I give a good enough description where you guys can really visualize what's up. So the first game, I believe, came out in 2011-ish. It was Tiny Epic Kingdoms. So they call this game a 4X game. Explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. So we've played these games before. Civ being the seminal one. There's a bunch of others out there, but it's tiny. So the game, as opposed to being on this big sprawling map, is on just a large series of cards that show different areas, and those areas yield resources: food, mana, and stone. The way the game works is that you select actions, and like in Puerto Rico, once you select an action, anybody else can do the action. These actions will let you gather resources, deploy your meeples, build defenses, and eventually expand into other people's territory, which means conflict. Yes, this game has fighting. The game has a pretty neat way of resolving fighting with no luck involved. You actually just kind of figure out what resources you want to devote to the war and do your thing. So you're going to be building, you're going to be, gathering, all that kind of stuff. Whoever, once you reach a certain condition, building buildings, displaying your maximum meeples, that's the game, and then most points win. The solo mode animates a dummy player. So we're going to talk a little bit about dummy players. Each of these games has one, and a lot of solo games do their solo mode with dummy players. So we can talk about that. This dummy is basically a direct competitor. So he's vying for the same resources. He's taking up the board, and he does war. And it's kind of there's a way of it resolves its own kind of attacks and everything. I don't want to say too much about it. I mean, I could describe it here, but I don't love it. That's why I don't want to say too much about it. It's kind of clunky. He's easy to manipulate. Kind of, screw around with him, put him where he wants to be because he's just automated. Not a ton of fun in terms of a dummy player as an opponent. So I like the game. It's a pretty good game. It's probably the weakest solo. Anthony, how do you feel generally about these kind of 4X games, and how does this one sound?
Yeah, I mean, 4X is one of my favorite genres of game, period. Like civilization games and really anything in that kind of general vein is those games tend to float towards the top of my lists on the multiplayer side. So when there's a game that is 4X that says it can be solo, I'm always very excited. I have not actually played this one solo. I do own it. I was an original backer back in the day and actually gave my copy to Daniel just because I don't really get it to the table very often. And I have heard that it's not great solo. So it's not something I've played through solo. And based on the sound of the dummy player, I'm not a huge fan of high-maintenance dummy players that are easy to mess with. Especially now that we kind of have the, we'll talk about it more later, but there's a lot more elegant ways to do it, I think, that have been developed. So, yeah, as a multiplayer game, I think it's great. I've had fun with it. It's not one that hits a table a lot. just because if I'm going to play 4X, I want something big and meaty. But the solo, yeah, I've kind of avoided it to date.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, actually, I'm going to kind of make this point a little bit later, but the dummy player comes up again and again, and I feel like it's been iterated, and I feel like it's been improved since this kind of incarnation of it. So this is just one way to do it, where it's kind of a more direct competitor, and you can kind of pull the puppet strings a little bit. That part isn't great, but I think it gets a little bit better. So hold on, guys. All right. So the next one is Tiny Epic Defender. So this is the cooperative entry in the series. And another thing about the Tiny Epic series, they like to hit a lot of different genres of game, which I actually kind of like about it. So as a cooperative game, you're on cards and it's meeples, and you're kind of moving the meeple from card to card. But instead of gathering resources, you are defending the land. And if anybody's ever played Pandemic, it's very similar to that. The putting out cubes and curing diseases or treating diseases part of the game. So, but instead of treating diseases, you're literally putting out fires. There's a deck of cards that are separate from it, and the cards depict some assaults, and the assaults are going to happen between players' rounds. The assaults will increase the threat meter, quote unquote, increase the fire level, however you want to think about it. And you go around, you lower the threat level, and you use special abilities to defend against attacks. You can kind of prevent the attack from happening in the first place if you do it right. And that's basically it. Like, you kind of go, the game is, I think it takes about 5 or 6 rounds, depending on how hard you want to make it. There are these mini bosses, there's artifacts that you can get. They're kind of rare, so they're not a huge draw in the game. The game is really that putting out fires aspect to it. So eventually a big boss comes out, you beat him without losing your central capital city, everyone wins, yay! It is a lot like Pandemic, it is a lot like Flashpoint Pyre Rescue, a lot like a lot of the cooperative games that you've played, which makes this soloable without any kind of dummy player right out of the box. The difference between this game and a game like those other games, like Flashpoint or Pandemic, is that you're doing something else. In Pandemic, you're also set collecting, and you're gathering the quote-unquote cure, and you're curing that disease. In Flashpoint Fire Rescue, putting out fires, and you're rescuing people or dogs or whatever you're rescuing there. This game, you're kind of only putting out the fires. There's other things to do. There's that tactical component where you can kind of block the fire from happening in the first place, but really you're just kind of putting out fires. It's solid as a cooperative game. I like it. I'll play it. But that's what you're getting. You're getting basically half of Pandemic plus a little bit more. So, I mean, I know you haven't played this game at all, Anthony, but you have played cooperative games. I don't know if this is the kind of thing that really kind of sings to you as something you have to play.
Yeah, no, it really hasn't. And this is another one that I actually own, and I just haven't played it. So, it's, after I got it, after several people had spoken to it and similar impressions, I like Pandemic and I like Flashpoint Fire Rescue. I think they're fantastic, but I also think they're pretty close to entry level, and they're not, massive table hogs. And I think the genius of the Tiny Epic series is that it boils down a genre to its essence. I don't think this, at least from the sound of it, does that so much as just simplifies. And those are two different things, I think. So I don't want a simplified version of Pandemic, but if you can strip away the chaff and have like a boiled down basic version on smaller cards, that does sound interesting. It doesn't seem like, based on what you described, that's what this is.
Yeah, I mean, what this is it's basically half of Pandemic. And without that set collection aspect, or without the rescue aspect, or without, like in Dead Men Tell No Tales, that rescuing, that treasure aspect, where you're doing that and doing something else, you're just putting out fires. And it's fun. It's fairly fast. Sometimes you can get some pretty rousing moments and everything when you can kind of pull a turn out of your butt or whatever. But for the most part, yeah, it's that. You either enjoy it or you don't. So moving on, my Tiny Epic explanations rolls on. Tiny Epic Galaxies. So this one, it's, I guess, another 4X space exploration type thing, but very different feeling from Tiny Epic Kingdoms. So it's a bit like Kingdoms. You're sending out, instead of workers, sending out ships to conquer new territories, these planets that come out. However, I noticed 3 key differences. One, the planets that you get, so the new lands, they don't only give culture and energy, but they also give special powers that you can get control of. So like you start off with one power where you can upgrade your home galaxy, but then you can get more powers, right? And that changes up your gameplay in a way that Tiny Epic Kingdoms doesn't. You don't get more powers in that game. You do kind of, but in this game you're really you're getting more stuff. In this one, and number two, there's no direct conflict with other players. So it's more of a race to see who can leverage their resources and powers and see who can grow their empire the fastest. You want to get to 21 points, you want to just kind of get near the threshold and use that last turn to just power through it. So, but it really is a race, right? You can swipe a planet for somebody else, you can take a little bit of their culture, but for the most part, you're not directly competing like you are in Kingdoms. And the third one, which is probably the biggest standout, is that instead of role selection, you roll dice, and they're these custom dice. They're pretty cool. And you use those dice to program your actions, to fly, to colonize, to gather resources, and all that kind of stuff. It makes the game luckier and swingier, which people like Kingdoms because there's no luck in it, really. This game has pretty significant amounts of luck. But, you trade kind of that tactical element or the strategic element for the more exciting dice rolls. The solo mode is a rogue galaxy. Yes, dummy player. Welcome back, dummy player. You can activate him. You roll for him, but it's pretty easy to kind of do it. There's rules for it. You activate him with dice rolls. He's also colonizing planets and collecting resources. It's, again, like a regular play. It's more like a race. It just kind of sets a timer on what you're trying to do. Sometimes it'll steal a planet from you, or steal some resources from you. But for the most part, dummy player just is there to set up a timer, and you have to get your 21 points before it does. What do you think? You've actually played this, so you're going to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. This is one I like a lot, and I think it does what I really like games like this to do with a dummy player, is that it emulates the experience of playing against somebody else without simulating every single thing that they would do. It strips it down to the one or two things that are important. As you said, it basically makes it a timer. Like, you can't just take your sweet time, and games that have good dummy players like Mage Knight or Scythe or Viticulture, they do that well. And so I think this is one that does that well. And it, again, like what I think makes it the Tiny Epic game work is it's boiling down to essence. So it's very streamlined and straightforward and quick, but still feels deep and has a lot going on to it. And yeah, it's swinging with the dice, but you can mitigate those a little bit, and you have the special powers that go with it, and you have to make a lot of decisions. This is a game I like a lot.
Yeah, I like this game. I think this is one of my go-to next step games when I'm introducing people to the hobby. Like, they've played Catan, they've played Ticket to Ride, they've played the Gateway game. I like bringing this game out as a next, more strategic step, and I've had a lot of success and fun with it. And then as a solo, it's just cool. Like, it's cool. Like, because of what really makes it work as a solo is the fact that there's a big stack of planets. A lot of different combinations of powers, a lot of different ways to kind of skin the cat on how you get to that 21 points. Without that deck of cards, this wouldn't be my favorite. But the fact that there's so much variability there just, I like this game a lot.
Yeah, definitely. You can play it over and over again, and you're always going to get something slightly different because you're getting a different rogue planet. And with the expansion, we're getting even more. So that's great.
I backed that expansion day one. That should tell you everything you need to know. That was an auto back. So there's Tiny Epic Western. So that's the last one. It just finished the Kickstarter, just came out, got into our grubby little backer hands, and again, different. So each one of these has a difference. Each one of the Tiny Epic games has a different spin. They don't just do the same thing over and over again. This game is the worker placement game, a worker placement Euro style game. Sounds funny because it's a Western theme, you want shooting and you want duels and you want all that, kind of more Ameritrashy direct conflict stuff. But for the most part, it's pretty, dyed-in-the-wool kind of Euro. Players have these 2 or 3 meeples, which are, I think, what are they called? Like rancheros or something. I forget. I should probably know that. Your posse, that's right, your posse members. And then your posse members, you spend rounds putting them on buildings like saloons, banks, hideouts. At these places, you get resources. You use the resources to buy improvement, and they give you special powers and score points. So far, sounds like every single Euro that you've ever played. Cool. There's two ways in which this game kind of mixes that formula up. The first is that if two people put their meeples in the same location, then they resolve that with a dice duel. So, you roll these kind of bullet shaped dice, I think, in the deluxe version at least, and you can use your resources to kind of mitigate the rolls and reroll. But it really is just kind of like, let's chuck dice at each other. Highest man wins. If you guys are trying to vie for the same spot, so that's pretty cool. Then the second one is, let's say there is multiple people on the same card, because there are multiple slots in the same card. You vie for control of the card using this kind of Texas Hold'em poker mechanic. And if anybody knows anything about Texas Hold'em, you have cards in your hand and you have cards on the board, right? And you're making the best poker hand out of those combination of cards. So the cards on the board correspond to the spaces where you put your worker. Whoever can make the best poker hand wins. And there's actually another spot on the board where you can kind of manipulate your hand. Bump it higher, bump it lower, just so you can make a straight, make a flush, or whatever it is. Very cool. I really dig that. I really dig that it takes, like, it does in a sense what Tiny Epic Defenders failed to do, where it takes that very basic Euro thing and adds enough to really give it spice and make it interesting and make it unlike what I've played before. So then the solo mode has, well, you guessed it, a dummy player. Yay. Welcome back, dummy player. But unlike in the other two games, the dummy player isn't directly competing with you. In a sense, it hampers you. Like, it gets into duels, denies you buildings. Like, here, I'm going to buy this building now, and I'm going to just, it really kind of goes after you. But it has its own way of getting points. It's not really competing with you. So like Anthony was saying before, the best dummy players don't really play with you. The best dummy players just kind of simulate opposition. And they present you with that opposition, makes you make different choices. You don't just do the best thing over and over again. So this is the best implemented solo mode of the series, and a very good game. I probably like Tiny Epic Galaxies better as a game, but this solo mode, I really feel like, with all these cracks that Scott Almes is getting, and that's who designed all of these games, this guy Scott Almes, he's getting better and better at designing these things. So so I know you're a big Euro guy. I mean, is that something that you'd be looking forward to kind of getting into?
Yeah. The funny thing about this one is I looked at it when it was on Kickstarter, and for whatever reason, and I guess I didn't dig deep enough, I was like, poker simulation. I don't know. It just, whatever about it, like the presentation, and then like the footprint looked so big for a Tiny Epic game. I don't know. I wasn't turned on by what I saw, and now I regret it because everybody I've spoken to is like, this is great, and the solo implementation is fantastic. And I'm like, man, what? See, this is the fear of missing out that hits you on Kickstarter. Is 12 months later, when everybody's talking about how awesome a game is that you thought looked bad, you're like, picked poorly. It's not. So yeah, this is definitely one I want to try out. I haven't played it yet. But I do know a couple people in my local group that have a copy, so one of these days I'll get them to bring it out, and I'm sure I'll end up picking it up eventually. Got to try that solo mode out.
One of the things that the Tiny Epic game does, and I think at this point we can kind of shift to our thoughts about the Tiny Epic kind of brand in general. One of the things I really like is that they do have Kickstarter exclusives. Every single one of these games has a Kickstarter exclusive, an extra character, an extra scenario, an extra tiny deck of cards, whatever it is. But it's exclusive to Kickstarter, quote unquote, but then they turn around and they sell it on the BGG store. So you don't have to miss out on any of the content. So I got onto the series around when Tiny Epic Galaxies came out, and that was after their Kickstarter, so I liked it, I bought it, and then I looked at the BGG store. I'm like, oh, okay, great. I'll fix that in. And then I went back, bought Defenders, and I found the extra Defenders content on the store. Now I'll just back it. They're good enough games where I'll just back it. and get the extra content, but you can fill in by going to the BGG store, which is nice.
If that wasn't an option, that's that fear of missing out, man. It's tough. I've spent way more money than I mean to on some games just because I'm like, well, I don't want to. If it is good, I want this stuff.
That's right.
There's a reason our other podcast is named Board Gamers Anonymous. You know, we have problems.
Right, acquisition disorder in the house.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I appreciate about the Tiny Epic series, but that's kind of that is not the reason to get into this. So we can kind of start talking about what our impressions are of the Tiny Epic brand, and why is it a thing, and should it be its own thing, and are these really satisfying game experiences? I mean, I know you guys talked about it on BGA. Any kind of conclusions there, or that we kind of start off with?
Yeah, it's a tough one because I feel like, originally, when Tiny Epic Kingdoms was announced, before I even backed it, we made fun of it. I'm not sure if we recorded that or not. I'd have to go back. That was way long time ago. But it was like Tiny Epic, like it just sounded silly, and you look at the game, and you're like, it just looks like a 4X game smashed down into nothingness. But then when you play it, and really any of these games with the exception of Defenders, it's kind of genius what he's done. It's almost a study in board games. It's almost academic in nature what he's done. He's taken a game or different mechanics that make up a certain genre of game and just boiled it down to bare essence, and then built a little bit on top of that, to build a theme and make sure the mechanics are fun and interesting and a little bit different in the case of a game like Western. But it's still like the Tiny Epic part isn't just we made a small game. It's we took what makes larger games interesting, like those pieces that you like, and we've made it work in a smaller package, not just shrunk it down. And I think that's interesting, and that's when they work the best for me. And again, not having played them all, I can't say for certain on all of these, but in the case of Galaxies, I feel like that's a real game. I don't feel like it's not a filler, it's not an end of night game. It's a good next step game. Kingdom's very similar. So I think that's the genius of the Tiny Epic brand, and I think it could work with anything, which obviously it is because he's releasing a new one every year. So we're going to keep getting them.
And it's going to keep on crossing different genres of games. So Tiny Epic Quest, I don't want to get too far into that one because that's a different episode, but it's an adventure game. It's like a mini Mage Knight. It's like a mini Zelda, I guess. We don't have that in the representative in the Tiny Epic game so far. So I backed that one day one as well.
Yeah, that one looks fantastic. And having demoed it a little bit at the last couple cons and just seeing what's being done with that, it's very clever. And as you said earlier too, one of the things he's doing that I think is really, of course he's doing, but also that it's so interesting to see it happen so quickly is the iteration. Like the improvement of the dummy player from game to game to game. It was a quick improvement from Kingdoms to Galaxies. And the Galaxies, it almost felt like when you watched the Kickstarter progression, it was almost kind of added on at the end. All those extra Galaxies they threw in there because the money got so high. And yet it ended up being, I think, BGG's solo game of the year. And that's just, it was well implemented and it worked because it had been iterated from before. He could have just taken the same system and it would have been, hey, we're simulating the whole other side of the table again. But no, it was smart in the way it worked.
Oh, and I guess the tiny part of it, I like the portability. I really do. When I go to my game store every week or so, I used to go to my nightly game group, I have a pack. I take stuff out of the boxes and I just put it in this, it's a bag big enough to hold a PlayStation to kind of give you a visual of it. And I have 30 games in there, just card games, like really, tied to time type stuff, love letter, and so it's nice to have all those filler games. But then the Tiny Epic games I have in there as that next step, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that I can bring just a bag full of games, and I could bring a real game. I could bring Galaxies comes out first whenever I want to do a next step type game, and it's awesome. So the Tiny Epic, like you were saying before, the Tiny Epic, this experiment, like it is kind of this academic exercise. So, but an academic exercise is how can I make a big game small? and they do it and it works, and for the most part. So I mean, that's like my positives that I have about Tiny Epics. Do you have anything else, like thoughts about it that are like, real, like, okay, this is why you want this?
Yeah, I mean, I think hitting that next step point is very important. I know, like Daniel, this is Tiny Epic Kingdoms and Galaxies are at the top of his list, automatically. Like he played it and he had to have it. That's how he ended up with my copy, actually. Is it just at that point it was hard to find a copy. I was like, take it, you love it, take it. But that's the level of game that he's looking for with his family, with his friends, and it's just that perfect next step level one. It's not too long, it's not too big, it's not too simple though, and that's such a hard place to find as gamers. I have gateway games and next step games and big heavy games, but finding one that kind of skirts the issue, in the middle there, that isn't just this big giant box that you have to lug around with you. If I wanted to bring a 4X game that's in the middle-ish for a large group of people, not a lot of things fit that. Maybe Imperial Settlers would, but that's a big heavy box too. So it's tough to find those things that fit the holes. He's done it with these games, and like you said, with the exception of the one that doesn't fully hit on all cylinders, they're all good and they all do it well. So yeah, I mean, I think it's impressive what he's done. I take back all the things I said 3 years ago about how silly it is. And, this is definitely something what I'm excited to see what he does next. Every time there's a new one comes out, I'm like, well, what genre are we going to hit next? So I'll be excited to see what the next one is.
So then, I mean, I guess that kind of leads to, a criticism of the series. Why aren't these bigger games? I mean, I know it hits that portability thing, but is that really such a big deal? Like, it's a big deal for me because I'm crazy and I like to put 30 games in a bag. I don't need 30 games in a bag. I don't play all of these games. I have other people, they come to the game night, they could just bring their IKEA bag and they bring decent sized games. Like, why play Tiny Epic Western when I can play Viticulture? Why play that portability thing is just kind of my mania. People bring games and they bring good big games. Why this as opposed to, a real game?
Yeah, that's the big question, I guess. And I guess that's probably what we were asking, a few years ago when we're like, Tiny Epic. It's tough, though, because, I mean, for example, my weekly game night is at a coffee shop, and there's one big table, and that's it, and then a bunch of small tables. And if we want to do a bigger game, which we can, we have to put together the smaller tables and just threaten bodily harm to anybody if they kick the table on accident. Games like this are great. So I don't think that if I took Tiny Epic anything to a game store with the big, nice gaming tables, it would get played that often. But playing at a coffee shop with other Euro gamers, this type of game would easily come out. And I haven't played it as much as some other people, but there's plenty of other smaller games on my shelf that kind of hit the same bill, where they're smaller, they're compact, but they still have enough meat to them that people are interested in playing them if they're Euro gamers. Not every small box needs to be a party game or a throwaway game or a filler game. It can be a real game. Now, occasionally, like with Tiny Epic Galaxies, I do wonder, what would this have been if he'd had more space and components to work with? Because you feel like there could be more there. And I don't, you kind of want to see what that would be. But then you have to wonder if it was conceived this way to start, or, if something else and he boiled it down, like what the impetus is from the designers, and we'll never know. He does have other games that he's released in the last few years that are big box games. So you have to wonder, like, what gets the Tiny Epic label slapped on it versus, a different game for a different publisher.
I guess the last thing I was thinking, because this is a solo podcast, this is Table for One. As solos, I know you've only played the Tiny Epic Galaxy solo, but you've played many, many iterations of the dummy player, which is what you're basically getting, unless it's the Defenders. So as solos, are these worth it for the solo gamer to play?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot harder to recommend a big, tons of space, ton of components, ton of cost game to somebody, even if it's amazing, which I have plenty of, and I recommend them all the time. Then something like this, like it's, $25. It has, in the case of Galaxies, you've got however many cards come in that box. I play it on, the footstool or the coffee table in front of the couch. It doesn't take up any space. You just roll it, like you can almost play it in the box. You don't need that much room to play this game, or any of these games probably. Like, they don't need that kind of space, which for solo gaming, especially when watching TV, when hanging out, just you don't want to set up and take up the whole dining room table every time. You know, we talked about that in our Oniverse episode. That's what those games are great for, is I kind of want to go sit with my partner and watch something. I don't want to be a recluse in my office. I'll take one of these smaller games, and the Tiny Epic series kind of fits that bill with a good solo implementation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like that, like we were talking about before, the dummy player has iterated, has developed, and, you know, the Kingdoms dummy player, so it's not bad, I just very clunky. I'll say it about that. It's very easily manipulated. You can kind of, you know, go back and forth with it. So that's not that great. By the time you get to Western, the dummy player is actually an asset. You know, it's great to, like, I think you made this point in a couple other episodes, like the Why Solo games. It's a great to learn the game, right? You're not doing exactly different stuff than you're doing in multiplayer, which is kind of cool. Like, a little bit different, but you're basically doing the same stuff. You're basically doing the engine building. You're doing the colonizing or whatever it is, and you're learning the game. By the time you go through 10 solo games, you're going to have a good idea of how to play and how to win eventually, which is a really cool thing. Like, it doesn't change the experience that much. I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's always a nice a touch for a solo version. You know, it's not just slapped on at the end. Like, you don't have a designer just looking at it saying, I guess this could be played solo. Why not? You know, here's a couple tweaks to make it happen.
Players 2 to 4. Let's change that 2 to a 1, and that's all the solo mode I'm going to add. Yeah,
right. There'll be one paragraph at the end being like, yeah, I mean, I guess just take the moves for the other guy and go for the high score. I don't know. So it's nice when it's thought out. We appreciate it, guys.
Very much so. Very much so. So I guess to kind of, in conclusion, my conclusions about the Tiny Epic Kingdoms, or Tiny Epic series, I think, I don't know if they're for every gamer, right? I don't know if they're for every game group. I think where they hit a really nice sweet spot is definitely what you were describing, Anthony, where you're playing in public and the space is limited, but you still want that kind of meat. This is perfect. And in my scenario where I play with a lot of different people, and they're at varying stages of gaming, and a lot of them do want that next step, and it does fit in my pack, great. You know, I love them, put them in there. And they're decent solos, so if you like a solo game, are they the best solos? I don't know about that, but they're really solid. So in those 3 areas, like, I recommend them. Like, if you're just like one game group all the time, I got time for heavy games, this might not be for you, because why not just play the heavy game, right? But I think it appeals in enough different scenarios where it's definitely, if you're in those scenarios, it's worth a look.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the reason I haven't played these as much as you have is just because I really, really like my big games. So if someone's like, you want to play a Euro? I'm like, yeah, I'm bringing a forklift. But it doesn't mean these are bad, and it doesn't mean I don't like them. It's just a matter of, like, what gets to the table. And I think they do fit in a lot of situations, especially for those kind of things. So, yeah, I mean, I think Tiny Epic, whatever he wants to do, let's see what's next.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to what's coming next in this series. I haven't been too disappointed. The solo on Kingdoms kind of broke my heart a little bit. I tried to bring it out again just because I hadn't done it in a while, just for this episode. And I'm like, I didn't even get through the game. It's like, oh, whatever. Sorry. But the rest of them I did. Like, I like Defenders. You know, I like the putting out fires. I do. And there is a little bit of a tactical element there. Is it enough to make it its own game? It is a divisive game for a reason. You either like it or you don't. But I happen to like it. And then the other 2 games, they really represent kind of evolutions in Scott Almes' thinking, his design, how much he can kind of fit into that little thimble of a box, which the box isn't even that small. I do have to say that like this is, it's portable, but the box, you need a good sized cargo pocket to carry these things unless you're gonna take it out of the box, which I do. It's like problem solved. I also collapsed the components, so I have little Western meatballs walking around the Defenders fantasy lands. You can totally do that too. Like once you really get into it, like you can really squeeze these things into a really small package. So I do appreciate that. But yeah, at the end of the day, recommended. You won't regret sticking your toe in this water.
Awesome. All right, so that is, I guess, our full take on the Tiny Epic series and our Tiny Epic episode. And we'll probably be back, next time he releases another one, which whenever that ships next year, every 9 months or so, we'll have coverage on these. But that's everything for this week's episode. And again, if you have not yet had a chance, please stop by iTunes or the Google Play store and leave us a review just real quick. It helps get the podcast out there, helps get it in front of more people, and share all the solo goodness with the other board gamers out there who maybe don't realize you can play these solo, as was the case for myself, a year or two ago, or just don't realize that there are podcasts out there about it. So do that, help us out there, and then stop by the website, boardgamersanonymous.com. You can check out each episode we post up there. I also write reviews on a lot of the games we're talking about. And then the Board Game Geek Guild, that's 1735. So we post there every now and then. I do post a lot more to Facebook and Twitter. You can look us up on either of those, and there are daily posts. Until next week, we will save you a seat at said table for one.
Later, everybody.